Since the beginning of punk rock, many artists have covered Velvet Underground songs. We can think of Bowie, Keith Richards as the latest, but none of them chose to cover Heroin, for example. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came about that you decided to cover that song, Rob?
Nobody covered Heroin. That is the most infamous song by the Velvet Underground. It was just for musical reasons. Most people came across it because of Rock and Roll Animal. The Lou Reed live solo album that was a big hit in '74. The version of Rock and Roll Animal is very long. It's got all these guitar embellishments. The original by the Velvets, which is from '66, has a very crude sound. Some people might find it hard to listen to, but I always thought it was a great song. So I had this ideal version in my head for years, so I did it my way. My stuff is characterized by this distorted guitar, the so-called buzz guitar. The original doesn't have any bass, although it's got this obvious implied lounging bass line, so I added that. The drums, I've done them like Maureen Tucker from the Velvets would have done them, but playing a solid rock backbeat. And John Cale electric viola, the only way I could reproduce that was with an instrument that had a long sound, so I used a Vox organ. So it came out as if played by a garage band, guitar, organ, bass and drums. Nobody covered it. I always thought that it was a great song, and not strictly because it's about heroin, but the song really is about transcendence. Heroin seems to be the means to an end, to this search for transcendence from the narrator, the speaker in the song. And that's why I've done it. It was because, as I said, it was musical reasons. I thought that musically it could be done better. I had this ideal version in my head for years, and so I decided to record it.
So you followed that song with When My Train Comes In, which is a very different sound, Rob. It's a bluesy kind of acoustic sound. So how did that come about?
Well, what happened then is that I found myself without a band, and I needed to work, I needed money, so I started performing by myself. There were venues around North London, like the King's Head in Upper Street, that paid decent money to people who did original material. At first, I did it with an electric guitar. It didn't quite work. I always liked the blues, so I decided to have a fuller sound. I decided to play in open tunings with the slide, the harmonic on the rack. So the songs acquired this bluesy flavor. Having said that, it wasn't somebody trying to imitate old bluesmen like Muddy Waters or something like that. The songs were definitely set in London, and like all my songs are based on people and events that have actually happened. Unknown to me, there was a bit of a blues revival going on at the time. So I found myself playing blues festivals in this country, all over Britain and abroad. The Underliners would be the last of the classic bluesmen, so to speak, who were still around, like John Lee Hooker or B.B. King. And I often opened for these people. And this went on for a number of years. I developed a repertoire in this bluesy, with this bluesy flavor, and When My Train Comes was basically done because the record company was thinking of signing me, and they paid for the sessions, and about half of the album comes from those sessions, and the other half was recorded with the band that I used to use in London. The basic idea was, what would have somebody like Robert Johnson sounded like in 1936 if instead of recording just by himself with an acoustic guitar, he would have had a band. So that's what we did. So I had this band that was like a band would have been back in the 30s or 40s, no electric guitars. It was me on the dobro and harmonica. There was a piano player, double bass, and a drummer that who played the very basic kit with brushes. That was the basic idea. And that's how the album was recorded. Some songs I'm on my own, some songs I had the band. Downtown, which is the song that is less rooted in Delta blues, is the one that became more successful than the others because it's kind of catchy, and you don't have to be a blues fan to like that. But the record company never released the album. So by contract, the master tapes reverted to me, and that's when I decided, eventually I decided to release it. Because it was recorded very well. The sessions were done in a professional studio with one of the best sound engineers around, Andy Shelley. He did the digital remastering of the soundtracks of Beatles movies, like Help. And the record company, I guess, thought, well, this guy can put on a show by himself, so it wouldn't cost us a lot of money to produce this album. Some songs I'm on my own, some songs I'm with the band. Usually I used to perform solo and acoustic, but when in London, we had a residency at the time, in a club in Finsbury Park, and I used the band for that. So there was a band, there was a repertoire, and as I said, the album was very well produced, recorded over a period of a couple of years, and I don't like to waste things. So we had the recordings, so I decided to release it. And When My Train Comes is the finished product.
So When My Train Comes, that was released on Apple, on iTunes. What happened with that, Rob? Tell us more about that.
Well, what happened with Apple is that I started a contract with them in 2012, and my first album came out. It was called The Best Kept Secret in Rock and Roll, which was something that a journalist came up with. Some other journalist in a review picked it up. We decided to call the album that. And the second album, Love and Death, came out in 2014. And 3 Minutes to Midnight in 2016. After When My Train Comes came out, 2020, I had a few songs that had been released only as singles. And with some unreleased songs, they came out on the album Flange in 2022. And in March of this year, Apple, or TuneCore, which is the name they use as a distributor, told me that they were going to take the first two albums and Flange down, not just from Spotify, but from every platform. And that was because, according to them, I manipulated the streams on Spotify in order to have more listeners, more streams, which is a ridiculous idea because there is no way I can do that. Only the people who run Spotify can manipulate Spotify. It was a case of censorship, really, because I had an average of 13,000 listeners per month on Spotify. According to them, I manipulated the streams as if I could actually do that to have only 2,000. I mean, none of it makes sense. And I just found another distributor and got the first 2 albums and Flange released. So now in 2024, 3 albums were released. Lots of people have heard them now for the first time. And that's why I'm not releasing an album this year. I did release a single down the line in May of 2024, only for Apple or TuneCore or iTunes or whatever you want to call it, to do the same thing again with the last single, only a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know what they hope to achieve by this, because I will just release the stuff by another distributor anyway. These people think of music only in terms of a product and how much it sells, and creating a brand like ours, Coca-Cola or something. But having When My Train Comes, an acoustic bluesy album on Apple, and 3 Minutes to Midnight, which is a rock album, on which, in comparison to the first 2, what I've done is that I used more keyboards and I tried to put a layer of electronics on top of the basic rock lineup of guitar, bass and drums. They don't make sense by themselves if you don't know what this guy did before that. The first 2 albums, you know, they're rock albums in the widest sense of the term. I call it rock and roll. Some songs might be somewhat derivative of punk rock or 60s garage or whatever. But there is a development which goes beyond how much you sell. Once that you have all the albums together, then it makes sense. You can see how these artists developed over the years. If you truncate somebody's discography, that doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't make sense. As a songwriter, as an artist, you cannot let these people disrupt your work, your discography. But unfortunately, that's the way the music industry is nowadays. We live in a world that common sense has been lost. You can see it in all aspects of society, in all walks of life. It's a sort of post-truth world. I mean, even the idea, young people nowadays, I mean, since the 50s, and Marlon Brando and James Dean portraying teenagers in films like The Wild One or Rebel Without a Cause. There's been a youth culture which didn't exist before, and young people have always been at the forefront of change, with a sort of rebellious attitude, whether it was Greasers and Teddy Boys in the 50s, the Mods in the 60s, the hippies and then punk rock and other stuff that happened in the 80s, even in the 90s with Nirvana. There is nothing like that anymore. And the young people now, instead of rebelling against the system, against the man, so to speak, they buy into the propaganda that politicians and media spin. They totally embrace it instead of rebelling against it, which is, it's hard to grasp for somebody like me and my age who remembers stuff like hippies and punk rock or whatever since I was a kid. And you can tell from the fact that the system, politicians, governments, media, they tell exactly the very opposite of the truth. They don't do information anymore. They do propaganda. And it seems like it's young people more than anybody else who are being brainwashed by this. I'm sick of seeing, for instance, these Hollywood celebrities, politicians, telling people that Ukraine is a democracy, that Putin is mad and that intends to invade Europe. It's just not true. Ukraine is not democracy. Ukraine had a coup orchestrated by the Americans in 2014 that Nazis in the army, they bombed their own citizens, ethnic Russian citizens in the Donbass. Opposition parties and their media, newspapers, television channels have been abolished. Elections have been abolished. Their army, which has been defeated by Russia, now is made by elderly and young people who are press gang into being in the army. This is a proxy war by America against Russia, which is not the Soviet Union anymore. Journalists have been jailed, clergymen have been jailed, and they expect us to believe that Ukraine is a democracy and we have to give them all this money to defend democracy, which is absolute rubbish. We are just being lied to about everything. It happened with the COVID thing and the vaccines and all of that as well. And you can see it in the music industry too. They created this two-tier system where you have these so-called artists who are half-naked girls who are not musicians, they're not songwriters. I doubt that any of these people can strum a couple of chords on a guitar, but who are promoted by these huge corporations like Disney or Universal or whoever, while everybody else has to fend off for themselves. And somebody like me, an independent musician, is not supposed to just do music anymore. He's supposed to know about digital marketing and social media. When the social media platforms censor people, take videos down, there is a lot of censorship, deplatforming people, no tolerance of dissidents. You know, a lot of stuff that happens over here in Britain and the rest of Europe comes from America, whether it's the movies or music, popular culture. And this political agenda too is being manufactured by the American government, and people are buying into it. And they say that whoever asks questions is a threat to democracy, when the real threat to democracy comes from them. So that's the world we live in. And you can see it in the music industry as well, that's my point. Where now we have this system where there are no records anymore, there are no record shop, going to a gig means to be searched, and you cannot smoke, and you cannot do this, and you cannot do that. It's a long way from how rock and roll was when I first learned how to play guitar and started my first band as a teenager and all of that. We're a long way from that, and we are in a different world.
Thanks for that, Rob. So if I ask you to think back from the start of your career to where you are now, for people that don't know, can you give us a synopsis of that covers that period?
Well, the way things are now, there are 5 albums in distribution. The best kept secret in rock and roll, 11 tracks, 2012. Love and Death, 2014. 3 Minutes to Midnight, 2016. Then for a couple of years I've released just singles, including Heroin that we spoke about earlier. And I was really trying to get a band together to play live. Usually I get a band, but then something happens and they last only about 6 months or something, and that's a major problem for me. I still believe that the best form of promotion is to play live and be seen live, and I find it very hard to find the right people to have a stable band. When I started, I played my first gig when I was 13 on my own with an acoustic guitar. When I was 15, I got my first band together. I was in high school. This was in Italy. I did that until I was 18. Then I left home and then I moved to London. I recorded some stuff back then, and the best recordings, the half-decent recordings that were done in the 80s were compiled on an album in the early 2000s. But that album is on YouTube, but it's not in distribution. And I used the name Rob Lear, and the Electric Kids was a name that I used for the band every now and then in Italy. But for the first 3 years that I was in London, the band was called the Electric Kids, and it lasted about 3 years. Then there was the period that I played soul and acoustic, from which the When My Train Comes material comes from. When My Train Comes came out in 2020, Flange came out in 2022. I intend to release an album in 2025. I think that now that I've been doing this for decades, I think that I managed to create my own thing. I mean, I think of my music as something very simple. The songs, I always say it, in interview that songwriting is not a skill. It's more like it's something that you don't really have any control on. Songs come to me like in dreams. I sort of will songs into existence. I usually come up with a title that gives me the focus to that gives me the focus for what the song is going to be about. And then in the middle of the night, or while I'm playing guitar just for fun, the song will materialize by itself. If a song is 4 minutes long, it seems to me that it took me 50 seconds or a minute to write it. It's almost like an instantaneous download that comes from somewhere else. And I've always said this, I don't have a method to write songs. I have a method about recording, I have a method about arranging songs. I know what sort of sound I want, but where the basic songs come from, that's always been a bit of a mystery to me, and I'm sure that most songwriters will tell you the same. Not having a band to play live is quite frustrating. I can do it on my own, but I'd rather do it with a band. Even because on my own, I could do When My Train Comes live. Not the songs, not the other albums, not the songs that people like the most. There's been no generational change, and by that I mean that when I was 15, at one point, for instance, I had a manager who was about 30, and he said to me, "Oh, when I was your age, I played bass in a band that did covers of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones songs." In the last 20 years, this hasn't happened as it happened in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, because there are less young people who pick up an instrument. A lot of them like rap or techno, so at most they learn how to rap or how to use technology and computers and drum machines and whatnot to do techno or drums and bass. But I personally think that rock and roll is still a viable, relevant art form. There is a big difference between Elvis and Joy Division, for instance. So I think it can still grow and be relevant. Is it different from the way it was? Certainly. Is it better? I'm not sure. I don't think so. You're almost expected to have a personal relationship with every single person that buys your songs. Well, I don't have anything to say to my fans. If I've got something to say, I write a song about it. This is not about me as a person. My personal life has got nothing to do with it. This is about the songs. I want people to like the music, not necessarily to like me on a personal level. So that's where I am now. I'm just putting out records, and hopefully I'll start playing live again at some point. By following what goes on YouTube or Spotify, I've got an idea of which songs people like, and I realized that people like mostly fast, up-tempo, short numbers, so that's what they expect from me. Rebel on the first album is a song that does well. It's got a disco beat. I Don't Want to Fall in Love with You, that's on the second album, that's quite funky as well. And again, straight up-tempo rock numbers, Red Pills, Sugar Baby Doll, Now We're Fast. These are the songs that do well. I think that I managed to create my own style for the very simple reason that it's very simple, and because I've been doing this professionally since I was a teenager. And And I'll tell you what the style consists of. A big influence on me as far as songwriting goes was Lou Reed, because he used a very simple, direct language, and because, like me, his songs were always set in an urban setting, and realism was definitely the key. I mean, there are lots of other songwriters that I like and that proved to be influential on me. It's not so much that I tried to copy Lou Reed, it's just that when I discovered Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground and I was very young, I realized, oh, these guys are doing exactly what I would like to do, except that at the time I was very young and I didn't have the ability to put it into practice, whether these guys could. So they were an influence in that sense. When my first album came out, not having a band, I realized that I couldn't rely on a band as far as recording goes. I had to record, if I wanted to put out albums consistently, I realized that I had to record them by myself. So I had to develop a style not just as a singer and as a guitar player, but also as a bass player, as a drummer, as a keyboard player, and I did that. What I play on the guitar is very derivative of the blues and early rock and roll. It's a different sound, it's in a different context, so you wouldn't necessarily associate it to Lightning Hopkins or Muddy Waters or Chuck Berry or Bo Diddley, but a lot of it comes from that. It's just a different sound, and a big influence on that was punk rock, and especially Johnny Thunders, whom I knew in the late 80s. We got quite close for a few years. The way I play guitar is rooted in the blues and early rock and roll, but it's got this sound which is not really punk, it's not really heavy metal, it's not really grunge, but it's definitely hard rock. Another big influence in terms of sound has always been the Stooges. With the Stooges and also with Hendrix, who came out a couple of years before the Stooges, the songs weren't necessarily based on guitar chords, but on riffs. Fan House, the second album by the Stooges, that's a very good example of that. So a lot of my songs are basically based around a guitar riff. And I also realized that I needed to use keyboards for variety at some point. I got a Vox organ from the 60s, that's the Vox Continental or the Vox Jaguar, the one with the red top, and the color of the keys is inverted. The black keys are white, the white keys are black, which originally discovered because of the Doors, which were another favorite band of mine when I was a teenager. Yes, I play harmonica. I've used synthesizers to create, to reproduce string arrangements on some songs. So that's what it is. As I said before, the songs are all, if not autobiographical, they're based on, I don't have any imagination in the sense. They're all based on events and events that actually happened and people that exist for real. And so to go back to the beginning of the question, that's where I am now. Where I am now is these 5 albums that are in distribution at present, and hopefully a 6th will be out 2025. One thing that I'm happy about is that despite not having a lot of funds or any backing from record companies and stuff like that, I managed to make videos for all my songs. There are 5 albums out, and every song has a video. They are on YouTube. People can watch the whole album as a movie, basically. When My Train Comes, for instance, that's almost an hour of music. It's almost like a double album. Every song has a video. And some of them have quite a lot of views, not so much on YouTube, but for instance, some songs on some videos on Facebook have 70,000 views. For some reason, I have lots of fans in South America and India, and sometimes people write to me, fans. They are from places that I hardly know about, like Kazakhstan, from Israel, from Mexico. Although I must say, it's the States where I seem to have the most loyal fans and followers. And that's all I can tell you about the future. I hope I get a band together to play live, and I'm gonna keep releasing records for as long as I can. And that's it. Just keep on doing what I've been doing. What I've been doing so far, and that's it. And thanks for doing this.